Hi, I'm Noah James. Dive deeper into the series by following The Chosen wherever you get your podcasts and on the Hope 1032 YouTube channel.
What did you think of episode 7?
Not up there with my favorites. As I was watching it, I'm thinking, I don't know if I'm actually going to go back to this episode. And there's a lot about it, though, that on paper, this is the kind of stuff that I've been talking about on Following The Chosen, that I like about The Chosen, that I want in an episode. And then here it is delivered to me, and I'm just going to whinge again. It didn't actually land as well as I wanted it to. What about you?
I thought this would finally be the episode that you really liked, because I know there have been ones you enjoy. There's a lot you love about the series, but in recent conversations, you've been speaking about how Thomas, he's not there enough, and there's these scenes that you think should be impacting Thomas. Where's his emotional response? This one delivers on that, because we have the Lazarus, I always struggle with saying his name, Lazarus experience that he has a response to.
And here's me watching it thinking, now there's too much Thomas. like you can't please me. So we will get to Lazarus and the raising of him, and how we had previously predicted that would be the finale of season 8, and clearly it's not, because we've got one more episode to go, and here it is.
To our credit, though, we expect a lot from The Chosen, and we believe they can fill in story around scripture because they do it so well. So I'm going to defend us and say that it's understandable why we thought that was going to be the conclusion. But
including how much we have been talking about Thomas and the addition of his storyline, let alone Judas, throughout season 4. But then this one, in and around the raising of Lazarus, which is one of the big show-stopping miracles that Jesus is recorded as doing. In and around that, I just found it got a little bit distracting what Thomas is going through in terms of his grief and his bewilderment at what Jesus will or won't do. All of a sudden, here's me finding that distracting and kind of annoying, and like, mate, just settle down a little bit.
Really?
I know.
I really enjoyed it. So I want to give you a couple of big themes I saw in this episode, and then see what your responses are. Okay,
I need to revisit my own thinking about this episode.
We'll come to Thomas in just a second, because I feel like his experience with Lazarus came after a few things that set that up. This episode was really a lot of conversations about death, the existence of death for those that follow Jesus, and how that can exist alongside this life and this abundance that Jesus promises. Like, there's a really powerful conversation between Thomas and John about that. And then you have a bit of that coming later between Judas and I think it's little John that he's speaking with, or not little John, little James that he might be speaking with in this scene. Judas is talking about how it doesn't look like what they expected it to look like. Like, how come as followers of Jesus, they constantly seem to be losing and being challenged and shamed? This isn't what glory is meant to look like. And the response to Judas saying that is that Jesus knows what true glory looks like. Did you notice that exchange?
I did, and it's registering now even more strongly as you talk about it and as the themes arise than when I was watching it, as I think I was starting to get distracted again. You know, when you watch a TV show and you get caught up in the mechanics of how they're doing it, not what's actually going on. And so even from the kickoff of this episode, I got a little bit lost, because at the start of the episode, which they haven't done for a while in season 4, haven't done it as much, where previously in a lot of episodes, they'd start with some sort of scene from earlier in the Bible, often in the Old Testament, but sometimes in earlier life of Jesus. And that scene has something to do with what's going on in the rest of the episode. It returned in this one in a very sort of odd way, I found, with Matthew as this anonymous wanderer in the desert in the somewhat near future after Jesus has departed, and he finds Mary in a cave hiding out. So there's obviously fear about being a follower of Jesus, and they're discussing the manuscript that he's been working on, and he wants to show it to Mary. Fair enough. She's been working on her own manuscript, which I think is a nod to the Gospel of Mary and some of the other writings that some have not considered part of the biblical canon. So I think there's a nod going on in all there. My question, where I'm heading to, Laura, is what was that about, and why was that there? And then that sort of clouded for me a little bit the rest of the episode. I kept searching for what's that got to do with all this discussion about grief and death and Jesus, the life that he brings, and the contrast between what we expect the glory of God to look like, and then how Jesus continually kind of doesn't do that. Like he doesn't do the things that we expect he's going to do, whether that is raising or stopping the death of one of his followers like Roumie, or whether it's standing up to Roman soldiers like in the past episode and doesn't walk the extra mile. All that sort of stuff is going on in here. But here's me getting lost again in the mechanics of how it's being arranged for us on screen. But as we're talking about it, I'm feeling better about the episode just talking about it.
I'm glad to hear it, because I saw that as something that, yes, you're thinking, okay, what are they going to do to tie this in. What's that going to represent? But I think they do that effectively to a degree when at the end of the movie, Mary Magdalene has this moment of dialogue where...
The episode, you mean?
What did I say?
The end of the movie.
Oh, yeah. Well,
they are movie length.
That is actually, but that kind of comes to something else I was going to mention to you about how Dallas Jenkins, who directs these, who creates these, he is such a filmmaker. And that's something that in some of the behind the scenes interviews I did, a lot of them actually spoke about that. Yes, this is a TV show, but there's such a filmmaking dynamic. So perfect slip of the tongue because they are like movies in the way that he does things, but it bookends that sort of frame, I suppose, of Mary Magdalene having a perspective on Jesus that while it's not included in the Bible as we know it, I think it speaks to the fact that in Jesus' lifetime, there would have been so many other people who experienced things from him, who had stories to tell, even in modern Christian life. You know, we all have some perspective on our relationship with Jesus, but not everybody's going to hear that. Not everybody's experience is going to be told. So I think that was part of what they were trying to do with that.
And I thought it really landed two main places for me in the episode. One was the ending. The other was the raising of Lazarus. I thought the gravity of the situation was terrific. The treatment of Mary and Martha, the sisters, and what we see in scripture and what so many of us know about their responses and their rushing out to Jesus and what is going on with Jesus now. Why is he here later after the event? And the conversation that he and Lazarus got to have, which is purely fictional, is the sort of thing surely that we've wondered about so Lazarus in the Bible is raised and then you don't really get much of Lazarus after that, but you're kind of wondering, what was that like, mate? Like what happened when you were dead? Let alone, what did you say to Jesus afterwards? Like, what did you guys talk about when it comes to, and I liked the touching on there, and you've already touched on it, about the discussion of death and the knowing of death and the grief and how that's wrapped up so closely in what Jesus has come to do, and yet still his followers understandably have a difficult time understanding that.
And some of those things you've mentioned are for me why I think this was one of Jesus' strongest episodes.
Oh yeah.
Because we have so many pieces that put together the connection between Jesus' humanity and his divinity. So yes, that conversation between he and Lazarus is added on, but it's one where he mentions the feelings of frustration. He says that frustration is human and I feel frustrated. It might be uncomfortable for some people to imagine those things within Jesus, but I think it was this really powerful moment to say that in so many people's lens, we can consider Jesus to be almost a monotone version of human because we think, well, yeah, you were human, but you were also God. So you're like clearly a perfect human. So you never experienced sadness or grief or these things, but scripture contradicts that idea. God wasn't a monotone version of a human. He was a dynamic, emotional version of a human. And that conversation really, I think, addresses that. And then, of course, one of the most powerful moments of this episode is when we see Jesus weep. You know, and why he wept. Why was it the death and resurrection of Lazarus that brought him to that point? And in my reading of scripture, I've always thought about it in relation to, you know, what a good friend, right? Like he was so sad to have lost the friend that Lazarus was. But in the way The Chosen represent the story, I saw it so differently because I saw that he was weeping, not just because of that loss of a friend that he had to face, but because of how much grief it caused their family, and witnessing somebody right in front of him wailing because they were so sad and so annoyed that God didn't show up in the way they expected. But Jesus knew full well that the healing was coming, that the resurrection was coming. But to me, it was like Jesus' emotion and his sadness was about watching somebody be so devastated, not knowing what was coming down the line, and how much it weighs on Jesus to have to witness that and to watch them feel something so tragic. The beat there was different than what I have seen before.
All of that is in this episode, I totally grant you. But then here's a guy getting still distracted by Thomas in amongst that, because I think the addition of the complexity of Thomas's emotions and response is now to a level where it's almost competing with some of the other things that we're realizing about Jesus, for example, and his response to things and the reasons behind what he's doing. So I got a little bit lost in amongst all there, even as much as I was a guy crying out for more Thomas, more Thomas, more Thomas. Finally heading towards the finale, you've touched on it already with Mary, but it was one of those moments in The Chosen that And Now I'm Back, I really loved, because I like what they do with the disciples when the disciples are all together and they have those moments, and they often go for a long time in The Chosen. I found this one did in a good way, where they all basically don't understand what's going on from different angles. And there are so many different angles that are brought in this one scene about who are the sheep, and is there going to be an army, and who's uniting and who's observing what, and like they all try to understand or grasp different elements of what Jesus has shared, revealed about himself in this perfectly relatable way of like, now it makes more sense of why you don't get it, because we see all of these pieces of Jesus displayed in this TV show, and even people who have read the Bible for some period of time struggle to put it all together. I've got more sympathy for the disciples that on paper sometimes you can go, really? Like you couldn't put that together? You see it all laid out a bit more clearly in this case in The Chosen, and you're right, in this episode a lot of these pieces are coming together, and you can see why the jigsaw puzzle still you don't understand what you're actually putting together.
But also I think in this episode as well, there are all those pieces and that's kind of going on there, but something we see in scripture too is Jesus' motivation. Why did he perform certain miracles? Why did he do some a particular way? What was his intention with certain parables? And I think what this episode aimed to do was clarify God's ultimate aim. So everything, I think it's Laz, I'm going to call him Laz because it's just easier.
Jesus called him that, according to The Chosen.
So Laz's sister is asking Jesus to say something to her that will give them hope, give them relief, just give me anything that's going to give us hope and relief. And you see that is Jesus' aim in every decision he's making, in what is God's will and Jesus' part to play in that. It's all about something. I think the way he says it is that he's got to do things that are going to be God's will for the faith and development of his church. And so when there's overarching things, some of the conversations that come later in this episode around Laz and his death and resurrection, and something John says in response to Jesus saying, I'm doing this so you believe, John goes, but we already believe. And Mary Magdalene's like, yeah, but not everyone for everything. And that then touches on Thomas, because while you may be ready to believe for healing because of what you've seen in your life, there's somebody else who believes in God, believes that Jesus is the Son of God, but is yet to cross the line in believing that Jesus could be a source of healing because they've got something that is a struggle for them in that. And so Jesus is catering for that perspective and that experience of belief, I suppose, as well as the person who's totally up there, fully, believing for everything and faith is switched on. And I just really appreciated how they articulated that.
I'm convinced. You've convinced me that this episode 7 was much better than what I was walking away with. As we wrap up, heading towards final episode of the season, do you want to do it again? Do you want to predict what's going to come as the finale for season 4?
I'm happy to predict, but I have no idea. Like, I should go back to scripture and double check what comes after these events, because that'll give us a good clue.
Was there a hint of the Last Supper was it this episode or an episode before? But I'm thinking that seems too early in the whole trajectory arc of all the seasons of The Chosen, or is it?
There's meant to be 7 seasons, so this is 4. So they've got 5, 6, and then 7 to get to the crucifixion. So I don't know. I don't know what.
So we're going to call it. It's the Last Supper. It's the Last Supper that's going to be the finale of.
Okay, let's see. Let's see how wrong we are next week.
We were so accurate on the last prediction. Let us know what you think. What's going to wrap up season 4? What did you think of this episode? Is Laura totally on the money? I think I'm really going much more towards your opinion than my own. Let us know in the comments. Make sure you subscribe to Following the Chosen wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you next time on Following the Chosen.
Struggle is real. I say the struggle reveals how you deal with the monster that